Hey, it's Bilal, and this is Deep Sea, the podcast about seeing the world more deeply. I've recently been thinking about the non-controversial subject of race. And focusing on America, I've been thinking, what is the correct term for people with very high level of melanin in their skin? Is it African American or is it black? In the 2020 census, the race question uses these categories. Interestingly, up until the 2000 survey, the terms were actually black, African American, or Negro. The term Negro has since been deemed offensive, and even I feel uncomfortable saying that word too. But what does African American mean? On the surface it seems simple, someone who has their origins in Africa. But most of the black population in America have their roots in America in the same way as white Americans do. They all got to America in meaningful numbers in the 1600s, the whites as European colonizers and settlers, and the blacks as slaves. So are we saying we need to see what people's locations were over 400 years ago to designate their race category? Why not go even further back, say 100,000 years, when all humans were from Africa, and so say everyone is African American? Another issue is that not all Africans are dark-skinned. North Africans, like Algerians or Tunisians, have similar skin tones as Southern Europeans, like the Spanish or Italians. Then, there are the light-skinned South Africans who are the descendants of European colonizers. So, an American with recent African roots doesn't mean they necessarily have dark skin. The tech entrepreneur Elon Musk and Hollywood star Charlize Theron are Americans who emigrated from South Africa. So, technically, they really are African American. Moreover, there's an important distinction between dark-skinned Americans who are descendants of slaves brought to America, what we could call native blacks, and the recently arrived dark-skinned people from African countries. That is, people who emigrate from Africa or the Caribbean to America. Nigerian Americans, for example, are some of the most well-educated social groupings in America, and some of the most successful black Americans are children of black immigrants rather than native blacks. For example, the Democrat vice presidential nominee Kamala Harris's mother is an immigrant from India, while her father is an immigrant from Jamaica. Meanwhile, Obama had a white American mother and a Kenyan father, and Colin Powell, the first black Secretary of State, his parents were both immigrants from Jamaica. So without understanding these distinctions, we could be glossing over the full extent of the trauma, injustice, and legacy of slavery on the native black population of America. Then there's a question of why are we hyphenating African Americans in this way? And if we do, why don't we call the white population European Americans? It's as though the default is white American and everything is referenced to that. So an American without a hyphen, it's implied that this is the white population. And the rest, you have African American, Asian American, Latino American, and ironically, Native American or American Indian. So even the indigenous population who've been in America the longest have a hyphen. The reason for highlighting this is that words and language have power. So if the default American means only the white population, the hyphenated categories are in reference to that. And so there is a power dynamic implied within that. The Americans or white Americans are the true Americans, while everyone else is a contingent American. That is, they're an African American, Latino American, Asian American, and so on. It's the invisible power structure that is implied in all interactions. Perhaps we should just do away with all of these terms and instead use the word black Americans for dark-skinned Americans. So at least this implies the same roots as the white Americans, i.e. they arrived in America at the same time. But the words black and white have loaded meanings too. In the dictionary, the definition of black is total absence of color due to the absence or total absorption of light, as its opposite white. As its opposite, white, arises from the reflection of all rays of light. The absence of light. Deeply stained with dirt, soiled, dirty, foul. Having dark or deadly purposes, malignant, pertaining to or involving death, deadly, baneful, disastrous, sinister. Foul, iniquitous, atrocious, horribly wicked. Clouded with sorrow or melancholy, dismal, gloomy, sad. Indicating disgrace, censure, liability to punishment. And the definition of white, of the colour of milk or fresh snow due to the reflection of all visible rays of light, the opposite of black. Free from spot or blemish, free from moral impurity, a symbol of purity, not intended to cause harm. So, Think about expressions like black magic or telling a little white lie. There's a lot of baggage and implicit meaning behind the words white and black. So calling someone black can conjure up, consciously or unconsciously, lots of negative association. So what's the answer? Well, I have to think about this at a personal level. I was born in Oxford, in the UK, to parents who were born in Pakistan, or to be more precise, born in British India and emigrated to the UK. I have brown skin. So in the UK, I could be called Asian, which, unlike in America, means of Pakistani or Indian origin rather than Chinese or Korean. Or I could be categorized as British Pakistani. But I actually prefer being called brown rather than Asian or British Pakistani, because the latter terms, Asian, British Pakistani, implies that I have some kind of cultural understanding or upbringing that is deeply immersed in Asia or Pakistan, which I don't really have. I've actually spent more of my life in countries like America, Japan, China, and Singapore than I ever have in Pakistan itself. So hence, I prefer to be called brown if I had to have one of those categories. But even then, I prefer actually to be called a Londoner than brown. Because to me, London accurately describes my location and where I've spent most of my adult life, but also reflects certain values of dynamism, openness, and acceptance of others. So for me, I think of myself as a Londoner, British, and in skin tone, brown. Now, I'll leave it to you to decide where you stand on racial designations. Thanks for listening. Please tell a friend about the podcast, leave a rating on iTunes, Spotify, Overcast, or wherever you go for your podcasts. You can follow me on Twitter. My handle is @BilalHafiz123. You can also follow me on Facebook, LinkedIn, or my blog, bilalhafiz.com. For my research work, you can go to macrohive.com. I'll be back soon, so tune in then.